Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Parshas Truma. And in this parsha, we start talking about the construction and the details of the architecture of the tabernacle, which is a temple which traveled with the Jews in the desert. Eventually, also, we're traveling around different parts of Israel until Solomon, until Shlomo actually built a permanent temple. And these are the sections which we today have problems with because we don't relate to it. We don't have a temple. We don't do the service in the temple. We don't do the rituals. We're not having sacrifices. It's just not something which is in our repertoire. So how do we deal with this and make it relevant to us today? So I'll start with the verse in the very beginning of the portion which says, V'asu li migdash v'shachanti b'sochem. God says, take all these materials and make for me a temple, and I will dwell in your midst. That just means dwell in your midst, meaning the Shekhinah, the divine presence, will come down in that cloud of glory, and the Jews will be camped around the tabernacle, which will be in the center of the encampment. And now God will travel with you. I will dwell in your midst and travel with you. And even later on, when the Jews go to Israel, there's always a place where they can go and visit where God resides. He's in the tabernacle, which was either in Gilgal or other places, in Givon, no, it's in different places. And then it's all eventually in Yerushalayim, in the site of the temple. And if you want to go see God, if you want to be in the presence of God, you travel there. And we have the 3 pilgrimages throughout the year, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and that's when you travel and you'll see the Shekhinah, you'll be in the divine presence. But that's difficult for us, and it probably was even difficult in times gone by when very few people actually had the ability to go to the place where the temple was. So how do we relate to it? So maybe it's important to understand what the Ramban Nachmanides says. Nachmanides says, what were we doing when we built the tabernacle? It was taking the experience that the Jews had at Mount Sinai. God came down in a cloud on top of the mountain, and he spoke to the Jewish people. He gave the Torah to Moshe, who then came down from the mountain and gave it to the Jewish people. But the problem is, we're no longer in Sinai. The Jews were traveling from Mount Sinai and didn't go back to that place at all. So what relevance does it have to people? So what the Ramban Nachmanides says is that the idea of building a tabernacle is really to take the experience at Sinai and now transform it into experience that we can have every day. That the Jews now are traveling with the tabernacle, and it's always, God's presence is always felt. And like I said, that might have worked for the people in the desert as they're traveling and they're very in close proximity to the tabernacle, but how does that relate to us? And the answer might be that we have to just take the Ramban's idea a step further. Just like we took that experience at Mount Sinai and transferred it to the tabernacle, we have to take the tabernacle and transfer it to our lives. So, for example, one of the things that are said is that a shul, a Beit HaKnesset, we call it a Mikdash Ma'at, is a small temple. Because what happened after the temple was destroyed, the Jews didn't just give up. They transferred their idea of relating to God from a physical place, and now we have that experience in tefillah, in prayer. And to make sure that it has some kind of association with a place that we could focus on it, we take our prayers to the shul. We don't have to take our prayers to shul. We could daven wherever. We can have that relationship with God wherever we are. But a shul becomes a focal point which allows people to make sure that even when they're going about their daily lives, they realize, hey, there's a place and there's a time where we could relate to God. So we call it a Mikdash Ma'at, a small temple. But then many commentaries take it even further. And they take this verse, V'shachanti b'sochem, I will dwell in your midst, less literally. And how do they understand it? It's V'shachanti b'sochem, in your midst, within you. B'soch kol adam ibnei Yisrael, in every person, amongst the Jewish people, God dwells within you. So therefore, it's the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which started on Mount Sinai, might have been in the tabernacle, and you could even say is associated with a shul, but really, no, there's a divine spark, there's a divine element within everybody. And the Kabbalists understand this, that every neshama, every soul is a cheluk alakami mal, is a part of God from up above. We have that divinity within us. And therefore, God is saying, you could make me present within you. And the way we do that, I mentioned before, it could be through tefillah, it could be through prayer, but it could be just in our everyday lives. As is said in the Talmud, and Maimonides focuses on it, is that we have to be v'halachta b'drachav. It says you should walk in God's ways, and he says that means you have to emulate God. Mahu rachum afatarachum. Just like God is merciful, so too shall you be merciful. Mahu chanun, just like he is gracious, afatar chanun, also you should be gracious. Just like you are kadosh, holy, we should also be holy. As we have to take these attributes that we see in God, these positive attributes we see in God, and we have to say, we have to make that a part of ourselves. We have to be God-like. We're not divine just because we're created with a divine spirit, a divine spark. That might be true, but we could lose that. We could extinguish that spark if we don't live our lives in the proper way. But when we live our lives in the proper way, when we take those ideas and the morals and ethics that we've inherited from the Torah, and we understand to be present within God, and we instill it within ourselves, what are we doing is we're taking that God experience and we're living it every day. And therefore, at the end of the day, v'asuli migdash, we make for ourselves a temple. We become the temple. V'shachanti b'sachem, God dwells within each one of us, and we are now elevated to a level of divinity, which we thought maybe only existed in the desert, in the temple, in the shul, but really, actually, could be present within each and one of us. So hopefully, when you read these sections of the Torah, you try to understand the symbolic value. And when we read about the offerings and the sacrifices, there are commentaries, and we have the ability to read these things and say, how does it relate to us? What are we doing when we bring a sin offering? Is it just an animal that's slaughtered and ritually and becomes sort of a magical way in which we atone for our sins? Or is there a message there? What are we saying? How are we approaching God? How is it a karban, to be karav, to be close to God? All of this is something that if we open our eyes and we read these sections of the Torah, which we're going to read for many weeks to come, in a much less literal way, it could open the ways and avenues for us to experience God in our daily lives. Good Shabbos.